We all know that language is important. Words are important. And religious leaders and politicians alike pound the living daylights out of a selected few, like the word family. Ontario families, hardworking families, ordinary families, Christian families, and of course, family values. The way some people use the word one could be forgiven for thinking that there is only one model of family that is in every way statistically average and has in all things identical challenges and needs. No distinction is ever made between rich families and poor families, single parent families, immigrant families, same sex families. But as the Vanier Institute of the Family said in its report, Families Count, history teaches us that family has never been one thing to all people. When people use the word family or family values, they are engaging in what British writer Stephen Poole calls unspeak. Unspeak describes an attempt to say something without actually saying it, what some of us would call a dog whistle, without getting into an argument and therefore having to defend or justify what they're saying. At the same time, he says, it tries to unspeak, to erase or to silence any possible opposing point of view by laying a claim right at the start to only one way of looking at a certain issue. In common usage, the term family values has become shorthand or unspeak or dog whistle for the heterosexual nuclear family with children and traditional family roles, gender roles. Rosemary Radford Ruether, a feminist theologian and author, in her book Christianity and the Making of the Modern Family, calls them coded messages about women and about how they should behave in relation to men. Others have added that these coded messages are also anti-single, anti-gay, anti-choice, anti-divorce, and anti-sex. Well, my argument with these family values people revolves around two things: family and values. In other words, how do we define family and who gets to do the defining? That's the first question. And the other is, what is it that we value in our familial relationships? The nuclear child-centered family has been called the traditional family. And it is traditional, but only insofar as it describes what has existed for the past 100 years or so. What seems to go unexamined, however, is the difference in models and expressions of family that have existed in earlier times, and how the idea of family changes along with the social, economic, and political forces of the day. In this sense, what we call the traditional family is a relatively modern creation. A number of years ago, the late Jerry Falwell, a familiar name to most of us, one of the self-appointed spokespersons for the religious right, defined family as the God-ordained institution of the marriage of one man and one woman together for a lifetime with their biological or adopted children. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that kind of a family. I grew up in a family like that, and look how I turned out. But if you don't, but if you don't fit this definition of family, if you're single, for example, if you're widowed or divorced, childless by choice or by circumstance, gay or lesbian or trans, living with a sibling or caring for an aging parent, well, too bad, so sad, but you just don't fit. You're not a family. Such a definition renders virtually invisible a whole group of people whose real lives are not reflected in that image of family. Families every bit as much in need of our support and our encouragement. But there are other definitions of family, and here's a definition from the United Church of Canada. So of course it's really long and wordy, but here it is. By family, we mean two or more persons who are joined together by reason of mutual consent or by birth or adoption or placement. Families are intended to provide a secure environment for nurture, growth, and development, and contribute to the spiritual, social, psychological, sexual, physical, and economic wholeness of its members. Responsible procreation is a primary function of many families, though this option is not open to some and not chosen by others. Obviously, a very different definition and a much more inclusive definition of family. But I guess one of the really important issues is who gets to do the defining? Who gets to say what a real family looks like? Because whoever gets to do the defining has a great deal of power. And trust me, it's always about power. Well, defenders of the so-called traditional family claim that one particular model of family is normative and has always been so, which of course is just not true. Any student of history knows that our modern understanding of the family as a nuclear child-centered unit is a relatively recent development in Western society. Family is a cultural construct, one that has undergone many, many changes and transformations over the years. And many of these same people will point to the Bible as evidence that their idea of family is the correct, one and only, God-ordained definition. And this is just wrong. Let me just say, it's bullshit. Because, in fact, the Bible, which for starters is steeped in a totally different cultural and historical and political context from ours, is packed with different models of family. Another theologian and feminist author, Virginia Ramy Mollenkott, in an appendix to her book, Sensuous Spirituality, Out from Fundamentalism, lists 40 different forms of family that are mentioned or implied in the Bible, in either positive ways or neutral ways. 40. Married, polygamous, monogamous, single parent, same sex, celibate, unrelated adult sharing a home, related adult sharing a home, childless marriages, cohabitation without marriage, to name just a handful of those 40. But just one example will suffice. We all know the story of Abraham and Sarah. They're the matriarch and the patriarch of our faith. We know that Sarah had been barren for a long time. And so, in order to give Abraham a son, because he was to be the father of many nations, so he needed a son, Sarah offered Abraham her servant girl, Hagar, so that Abraham could have sex with her and have a son with her, which he did. His name, the son's name, was Ishmael. And apparently, all of this was just hunkadory with God. And ironically, Jesus didn't have much good to say about family at all, at least not the notion of family that we're familiar with. In fact, at the wedding feast in Cana of Galilee, where Jesus performed his first miracle, Jesus was actually quite rude to his mother. I would never have gotten away talking to my mother the way he talked to his mother. And in this morning's reading from the Gospel of Matthew, a very strange kind of reading, Jesus dismisses his immediate family, saying, "Who is my mother? And who are my brothers?" Or in the inclusive language version that Sharon read from this morning, "Who are my kin?" And pointing to the disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my kin. For whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and my mother." And at another time, talking about the cost of discipleship, Jesus actually says, and of course we would say it's hyperbole, but biblical literalists wouldn't say that. Jesus actually says that unless you hate your own father and mother, and wife and children, and brothers and sisters, you cannot be my disciple. So don't be looking to Jesus for warm, fuzzy musings on the importance of family. So that's the first part of the equation. What is the definition of family and who gets to decide? To move on to the second part of the family values equation, what are the values that we hold up as being important and crucial for family relationships today? Well, we know what they are for the family values people: heterosexuality, monogamy, procreation, roles defined by gender, Christian, man is the head of the household. Well, I don't know about you, but I can think of dozens of values that I would lift up as being crucial in family relationships, and they're almost entirely different from the ones I just named. I would name things like mutuality and consent, compassion, pleasure, for heaven's sake, justice, equality, security, life-giving, trustworthy, companionship. And I'm sure that every one of you could add many more of your own. But for today, I'm going to comment on just three of the ones I just mentioned: fidelity, mutuality, and life-giving. Now, when most people hear the word fidelity, they think of monogamy. What I mean by fidelity can include monogamy, but it's much, much more than that. Theologian Jim Cotter says that to be faithful is to be full of faith, to be full of trust, to be willing to let love be vulnerable. This understanding of fidelity is not focused on one single physical act, but on the total context of the relationship between people who love each other and trust each other. And the biblical notion or idea of covenant is helpful here, because a covenant with God requires more than just legalistic adherence to formal codes of behavior. The Hebrew prophets, we know, prophets like Hosea, Amos, and Micah, are all clear that the performance of ritual acts is meaningless unless it is consistent with what is in the heart. In the words of Micah, what does God require of us? Not offerings and sacrifices, not empty ritual and hollow praise, not adhering to formal codes of behavior, but justice, kindness, and humility. A second value that I would lift up is the value of mutuality. Within our families, there's usually a sense of obligation that we feel toward the people we love. When we commit ourselves to another person in covenant, when we marry a partner, or when we decide together to have children, we take on responsibilities for those other people. And so family members can expect a measure of commitment from us that others don't necessarily expect. A different kind of commitment, perhaps, or a different degree of commitment. And this is all connected to our belief, or at least our hope, that in our families we are loved unconditionally. Theologian Carter Hayward claims that mutuality is a process that involves the struggle to share power and to work out inequality. It challenges us to think about the ways in which we allocate and share power in our relationships, and to be willing to renegotiate the balance of power when it's out of whack. And finally, I would like to offer the description life-giving as my third family value. Now, one manifestation of being life-giving is obviously and quite literally procreation. And as a parent myself, I can vouch for the fact that parenthood is both exasperating and frustrating and terrifying, and at exactly the same time, fulfilling and rewarding. But there are other dimensions to what I mean by life-giving other than making babies. One such dimension is creativity, the power to bring something new into being, to transcend the limits imposed by other people, to create a new vision. When we enter into relationship with another person, we are transformed. We're changed. We don't remain exactly the same person we were before we entered into that relationship, whether it's with a partner or with a family or with our children. Through relationships, we come to a greater awareness of who we are and who we are becoming. We can also give life by providing a place where members of our families, both biological or chosen, can be themselves and be fully accepted. We can give life by providing hospitality to other people, especially to the outsider. Supported and encouraged by our primary relationships, we can give life by going out from the security of our homes and our families to transform our communities by working for justice and dignity for all. Family values revisited. It's an interesting exercise to try to define, first of all, what we mean by family, and to identify, secondly, what we think are the important values in families and relationships. But it's more than just interesting. It's crucial, because it's not just about personal choices. The family is also a political institution. Creating healthy families is not only about our personal satisfaction and our personal fulfillment and happiness and well-being. It's also about the creation of a good community and a healthy society. Family stability, or the lack of it, has often been linked with political stability. We've been told, for example, that when women left the home in large numbers to enter the workforce, a host of social problems was unleashed. And what couldn't be blamed on women was blamed on gays and lesbians. I disagree with those people who claim that all of the societal problems we now face have arisen because we have stopped teaching traditional family values. I would like to suggest that traditional family values are not able to address the problems of contemporary society. So a return to those values would be no cure for our social ills. Instead, the prescription is a new value system, one which is, I think, much more consistent with and faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ that we proclaim. One which is actually not new at all, but quite old. To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. So be it.